It begins not with stock tickers, not with billion-dollar valuations flashing on a Bloomberg terminal, not with red carpets rolled out beneath the feet of Hollywood elites, but with a single, crumpled receipt, a scratched DVD case, and a 40 late fee that felt less like a transaction and more like a personal betrayal. Picture this. 1997. Reed Hastings, a man whose mind danced with algorithms and whose soul craved elegant solutions, walks into his local Blockbuster video store in Los Gatos, California, clutching a copy of Apollo 13, the very film about astronauts stranded in the cold void of space, fighting against impossible odds to return home. And he isn't thinking about Jim Lovell or Houston or oxygen tanks. He's thinking about the $40 he just handed over like a penitent offering at an altar of corporate indifference. $40 for returning a movie 3 days late. Not because he was careless, not because he didn't care, but because life happened. Because his toddler had a fever that night. Because a client meeting ran late. Because he forgot to rewind the VHS and drop it in the bin before 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. That fee wasn't just money, it was a symbol. A symbol of a system that treated customers not as human beings with messy, beautiful, unpredictable lives, but as debtors to be punished, inconveniences to be managed, liabilities to be fined into compliance. And in that moment, under the harsh fluorescent glare of a dying empire, something inside Reed didn't just break, it ignited. Not with rage, not yet, but with a quiet, unshakable conviction. There has to be a better way. But before that conviction could become a company, before it could become a verb whispered in living rooms from Seoul to Sao Paulo, it had to survive the brutal crucible of doubt, failure, before near-total annihilation that swallows 90 of dreams before they even learn to breathe. Reed Hastings wasn't some wunderkind born with a golden laptop in his crib. He was a former high school math teacher who'd already tasted the bitter ash of entrepreneurial collapse with Pure Software, a company he co-founded, poured his heart into, and watched slowly dissolve in a soul-crushing merger that left him financially secure, but spiritually hollow. He walked away with millions, yes, but also with a haunting question that echoed in the silence of his success. What's the point of building something if it doesn't make life genuinely better for real people? That question became his compass, his North Star, his silent vow. And when he met Mark Randolph, a wiry, fast-talking marketing visionary with restless energy and a mind that crackled like live wire, they didn't just brainstorm in a sterile conference room. They dreamed in a cramped office above a pizza parlor in Scotts Valley, fueled by cold coffee, greasy takeout, and a shared belief that the world was ready for kindness disguised as convenience. They sketched on napkins, argued over whiteboards, and dared to imagine something radical. What if you could rent movies by mail? Keep them as long as you wanted, and never ever pay a late fee. Just one flat monthly price. Unlimited rentals, no guilt, no fear, just trust. It sounded naive, delusional even. Blockbuster was a 6 billion Goliath with over 9,000 stores, a cultural institution where teenagers had their first awkward dates, where families picked Friday night rituals like choosing armor for battle. How could two guys with a website, a dream, and a garage full of DVDs possibly compete with that? But they believed, not in technology alone, but in humanity. They believed people would return discs if you trusted them to. They believed that removing friction wasn't just good business, it was an act of respect. And so, on April 14, 1998, Netflix.com flickered to life, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with a whisper. And the world barely noticed. The early days weren't glamorous, they were grueling. Imagine waking before dawn in your garage, fingers raw from tearing open bubble wrap, labeling envelopes with shaky hope, sorting DVDs like sacred relics, driving to the post office in rain or shine, praying the mail would go out on time so someone, somewhere, could watch Forrest Gump before bedtime. Imagine customers calling, furious and confused, "Where's my movie?" While you're elbow deep in inventory spreadsheets, running on 4 hours of sleep, your bank account bleeding red, your credit cards maxed out, your spouse wondering if this hobby will ever become a livelihood. Investors scoffed. DVDs by mail? That's your big play? One venture capitalist sneered during a pitch meeting. People like going to Blockbuster. It's a social experience. Social, Reed thought. Standing in line behind someone arguing whether Die Hard counts as a Christmas movie, that's a social experience? But the real pain wasn't the mockery. It was the silence. Months passed with barely 300 subscribers. The website crashed constantly under the weight of its own fragility. DVDs arrived scratched or lost in transit. Customers cancelled in frustration. Morale plummeted. There were nights Reed sat alone on the garage floor, back against a stack of unopened envelopes, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was just another fool chasing a mirage in the desert of failed startups. But then he'd remember that 40 fee, the humiliation, the injustice, the quiet rage, and he'd stand up, pack another disc, seal another envelope, and keep going. Because this wasn't about profit. It was about principle. It was about building a world where you weren't punished for being busy, for being tired, for being gloriously, messily human. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. People noticed. They told friends. They loved the freedom. They loved the trust. By 1999, they introduced a subscription model, unlimited rentals for one flat monthly fee, and the dam finally broke. Subscribers grew, not explosively, but steadily, like roots cracking through concrete, one quiet conversion at a time. Still, survival was precarious. Cash was always tight. Servers groaned under load. Every new subscriber felt like a miracle. Then came the dot-com crash of 2000, a financial earthquake that wiped out entire industries overnight. Startups vanished like smoke in the wind. Investors pulled back in terror. And Netflix, burning through cash with only about 300,000 subscribers and no clear path to profitability, stood trembling on the edge of oblivion. Reed knew they couldn't survive alone. So he did the unthinkable. He flew to Dallas, Texas, walked into the gleaming headquarters of Blockbuster, the very empire that had inspired Netflix's birth, and sat across the table from CEO John Antioco. He didn't beg, he offered. "Buy us," he said calmly, laying out the numbers. "For $50 million. Let us become your online arm. Rebrand us as Blockbuster Online. Together, we can lead the transition into the digital age." He laid out the data, the vision, the inevitability of streaming, the hunger for convenience. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, not a skeptical smirk. He threw his head back and laughed, as if Reed had suggested replacing popcorn with tofu. "Ridiculous," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Netflix is a niche toy for tech geeks and DVD enthusiasts. People will always want to browse physical shelves. They like the experience." In that moment, Reed didn't feel rejected. He felt liberated, because rejection from the empire meant he no longer had to play by its rules. If Blockbuster wouldn't evolve, Netflix would have to erase it. Not out of malice, but out of love for what could be. That no became their North Star, their battle cry, their baptism by fire. From that day forward, Netflix stopped playing small. They stopped apologizing for their ambition. They doubled down on technology, on user experience, on building something so seamless, it felt like magic. They invested heavily in Cinematch, their recommendation engine, that learned your tastes better than your best friend, better than your spouse, better than you knew yourself. They perfected the red envelope, prepaid postage, no return label needed, just drop it in any mailbox. They turned waiting into anticipation, not frustration. They made returns effortless, elegant, almost poetic. By 2002, they went public, raising $82 million in their IPO, not enough to throw a party, but enough to take a deep breath and keep building. And while the world was still obsessed with DVDs, Reed was already watching the horizon. He saw broadband spreading like wildfire across America. He saw laptops migrating from desks to couches. He saw the future, not in plastic cases and cardboard sleeves, but in streams of light, in data packets flying through the ether, delivering stories instantly, silently, beautifully. But, streaming in the early 2000s, the technology wasn't ready. Bandwidth was spotty. Mobile devices were primitive. And the studios? They called it piracy. They called it the death of cinema. They refused to license their content, terrified of losing control. So Netflix had to wait. And while they waited, they perfected their model. They built trust. They earned loyalty. They became not just a service, but a ritual, a quiet promise, kept every time a red envelope landed in your mailbox. Then, in 2007, the stars finally aligned. Broadband penetration crossed a critical threshold. Mobile devices exploded in power and popularity, and Reed made the boldest move of his life. He announced that Netflix would launch streaming. Not as a side feature, not as an experiment, as the future. Overnight, they pivoted. They told their loyal DVD customers, you can still get discs, but now you can also watch instantly on your computer with no waiting, no shipping, no scratches. The reaction was chaos. Some users cheered, others panicked. DVD loyalists felt betrayed, abandoned, confused. Tech blogs mocked the video quality. Competitors called it a gimmick. But Reed didn't flinch. He saw the arc of history bending toward instant access, and he leaned in with everything he had. This was the second great test, betting the entire company on a vision most people couldn't see, couldn't feel, couldn't believe in. And then came the fall that nearly destroyed them. In 2011, in an attempt to separate the old from the new, Reed announced a catastrophic decision. Netflix would split into two services, Netflix for streaming and Quickster for DVDs. Prices would go up. Accounts would be separate. The experience would fracture. And the world erupted. Subscribers revolted. Social media exploded with outrage. The press crucified him. Reed Hastings has lost his mind, one headline read. Stock plummeted by 80 in months. Critics called it the worst business decision in tech history. For the first time, Reed wasn't seen as a visionary. He was seen as a villain, a CEO drunk on his own success, out of touch with the very people who built his empire. In the silence that followed, the sleepless nights, the tense boardroom meetings, the public humiliation, he did something rare in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley. He listened. He apologized. Not with corporate jargon, not with legal disclaimers, but with raw human humility. I messed up, he wrote in a public letter. I owe everyone an explanation and a better experience. And then he fixed it. He killed Quickster. He unified the brand. He refocused entirely on the user. And in that crucible of failure, Netflix didn't just recover, it evolved. It learned that innovation without empathy is tyranny, that growth without grace is greed, that even giants must stay humble, must kneel before their audience, must remember that trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. But the true revolution was still coming. Because by 2012, Reed realized a terrifying and liberating truth. If Netflix wanted to control its destiny, it couldn't rely on studios. It had to become a studio. So he did the unthinkable. He spent $100 million, nearly their entire content budget at the time, on one show. 1. House of Cards. Not because they knew it would be a hit, but because their data showed it should be. Users loved political dramas, David Fincher films, and Kevin Spacey performances. So they greenlit it, without a pilot, without focus groups, without studio notes. They gave the creators total creative freedom, an unheard of luxury in Hollywood. And when House of Cards dropped in February 2013, it wasn't just a show. It was a declaration of war on the old Hollywood system. It proved that storytelling could be driven by insight, not intuition. By audience love, not executive ego. And it worked, spectacularly. Awards poured in. Subscribers soared past 40 million. And suddenly, every studio was scrambling to catch up, launching their own streaming services in panicked imitation. Netflix wasn't just distributing content anymore. It was defining culture. It was giving voice to stories that traditional gatekeepers had ignored for decades. Foreign films, LGBTQ+ narratives, experimental formats, documentaries that changed laws and shifted public opinion. It became a global stage for human expression. From Alfonso Cuarón's intimate Mexican family saga Roma, a black and white film in Spanish that became an Oscar frontrunner, to the Korean survival drama Squid Game, which became the most watched series in Netflix history, transcending language and borders to become a global phenomenon, Netflix proved that great storytelling has no nationality, no language, no limits. It connected strangers across continents through shared emotion, shared tension, shared tears. It made a grandmother in Mumbai cry over the same scene that made a teenager in Berlin laugh. And through it all, Reed remained quiet, not flashy, not seeking the spotlight. While other tech titans built cults of personality, he built a culture of radical freedom and responsibility. At Netflix, there are no vacation policies. You take time when you need it. No rigid dress codes. You wear what lets you do your best work. No annual performance reviews, just constant, honest feedback. Just one rule: act in Netflix's best interest. Trust people. Pay them top of market. And if they're no longer the right fit, part ways with respect and generosity. This wasn't just HR policy, it was philosophy. It was the same belief that started it all. Treat people like adults, and they'll rise to the occasion. And they did. Employees became missionaries. They worked insane hours, not because they were forced, but because they believed, because they were building something that mattered. Something that changed how the world experiences stories. By 2020, Netflix had over 200 million subscribers in 190 countries. It spent more on content than any network in history, over 17 billion annually. It survived the global pandemic, not just intact, but thriving, becoming the world's shared living room, the digital hearth where families, friends, but even strangers found common ground in stories during a time of unprecedented isolation. And through it all, that 40 late fee? It became legend, not as a wound, but as a compass. A reminder that sometimes the greatest innovations begin not with a eureka moment in a lab, but with a moment of quiet frustration in a video store aisle. But let's be brutally honest. This isn't just Reed's story. It's yours, because every single one of us has stood in our own Blockbuster, holding our own Apollo 13, crushed by our own late fee, whether it's a boss who told you you're not leadership material, a bank that denied your small business loan, a partner who walked away when things got hard, a dream you buried because now's not the time, or the voice in your head that whispers, you're not good enough. We've all been told no. We've all faced the laughter, the doubt, the deafening silence of indifference. We've all maxed out our emotional credit cards, trying to keep our vision alive while the world scrolls past, oblivious. Maybe right now, you're in your own garage, packing your own DVDs, writing your book, coding your app, painting your canvas, building your business, wondering if anyone will ever notice, if anyone will ever care. Maybe you're reeling from your own Quickster moment, public failure, private despair, the feeling that you've let everyone down, including yourself. But here's the truth they don't tell you in business school or on Instagram. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the tuition you pay for it. Every late fee, every crash, every no, every sleepless night, they're not roadblocks. They're stepping stones. They're the fire that forges your clarity, your conviction, your courage. Netflix didn't win because they had better technology. They won because they had a better belief, a belief that people deserve better. That convenience is kindness, that stories connect us more than they divide us. That trust is the ultimate currency. And you carry that same belief. Your late fee, whatever it is not your end. It's your origin story. Don't ignore it. Don't numb it. Lean into it. Let it fuel you, because the world doesn't need more people who accept the way things are. It needs you, the one who looks at a broken system and whispers, what if it could be different? The one who dares to build without permission, who creates not for applause, but for impact. Who knows that empires aren't built in boardrooms, they're built in the quiet hours, in the tears wiped away before dawn, in the refusal to let a 40 fee, or a rejection letter, or a failed launch, or a doubting voice define your worth. Netflix's journey wasn't about DVDs or streaming or billion-dollar valuations. It was about the courage to turn pain into purpose, to transform humiliation into hope, to look at an injustice and say, I will build a better way. And if two guys above a pizza parlor could change how the entire world experiences stories, what could you change? What late fee in your life is begging to be turned into a revolution? Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't wait for validation. Don't wait for someone to give you permission. Start where you are. Use what you have. Build what only you can build. Because the future doesn't belong to the giants. It belongs to the believers, to the builders, to the ones who look at a late fee and see not a punishment, but a promise. And so, as the final frame of this story fades to black, Carry this not as a quote, as a covenant written in your bones. The world changes not when we accept what is, but when we dare to build what could be. Now go. Pack your envelope. Send your signal into the void. And never ever pay that late fee again, because your time, your dream, your story is already due to the world.